In this video, I'll demonstrate how to use the Linear Gradient tool in Adobe Lightroom CC. The Linear Gradient tool will allow you to add gradual transitions of colors or values to your photos. So I'll search for an image that has an area that I would like to transition to either lighter or darker. On the right-hand side, this is the Linear Gradient icon. Its panel is very similar for the settings for the brush tool. I'll start by darkening the exposure, moving the slider to the left. You won't see any changes until I click on the photo and drag to bring up these three lines. Notice that the image at the top, especially inside the alcove, is now darker and it fades to a lighter value down to the bottom line. You can click and drag to rotate the angle of these lines, and you can click on the individual line to space out the transition of the gradient. Click on the blue pin and you can grab the lines and drag them somewhere else in the picture plane. Hit the O key on your keyboard for the overlay, which will bring up a red mask indicating the area that is being affected by the gradient. The red fades in a similar way as the gradient, more intense at the top and then fading at the bottom. To remove a gradient, hit the Delete or Backspace key on your keyboard. I'll click and drag down again, and this time I'll hold the Shift key on my keyboard, which will lock the lines into straight, horizontal, or vertical depending on your needs. I'll tap the O key again to look at the mask, and then I'll adjust the sliders as I see fit. And I'll also make any adjustments to the placement of that mask. Next, I'm going to click on the eraser brush. Click this arrow to see more options. And selecting Auto Mask will help keep the eraser brush within the lines. Use the shortcut bracket keys on your keyboard to adjust the size of your brush. And because the light source is coming from the front, I'll erase the gradient mask from the archway. I also want to remove the mask from the cat to lighten her up. And this planter also needs to be lightened so that it can once again be more of a focal point. Now, if you accidentally erase too much and you erase into the mask, you can go back over and change to your brush tool and brush back on that part of the mask. Turning on the overlay will help you see the parts of the mask that you've removed, and if you need to increase the intensity or apply more coverage, the mask will help you see that. I'll use this icon to show the original image versus the changes. And you can see that the darker values in the alcove creates a greater contrast, helping make objects in the foreground stand out more. I'd like to show you one more example with multiple gradients. In this image of the Taj Mahal, it was very gloomy that day, so I'd like to add a linear gradient to the sky and to the land to add more variation in exposure values. I'll start with a gradient over the top half and add some cool blue to the sky with the temperature slider. I'll bring up the exposure a bit, increase the contrast, and bring down the highlights. Now you can see a variety of blue values in that sky. Next, I want to do the same with the land by adding another gradient, but I want it to face up instead of down. So I'll click and drag another gradient, and I can actually flip the gradient with the mouse and drag it into place. And this way, the lightest values of each gradient are meeting in the middle of the picture plane over the river. My sliders are still set to the previous gradient, so I'll click on the circles to reset them. I'll warm up the values in the land with my temperature and tint sliders and slightly increase exposure and contrast. Then I'll grab the eraser brush, and when you have multiple gradients, you need to use the O key to make sure you have the correct one selected. The eraser brush won't erase over multiple gradients at the same time. So I'll erase the window frame on the bottom gradient first, and then I'll turn on the overlay and click on the blue pin for the top gradient to erase that part of the frame. And then I'll erase some of the mask on the architecture and the land. Now that this photo has more temperature variations, I notice a light pole in the center that I didn't see before. So I'm going to use the healing brush to remove it. But it's funny how you can miss something so obvious, particularly if your image is very underexposed. So I'll export this image, saving it to the Creative Cloud in my folder for this unit. And that is how you use the Linear Gradient tool to add gradual transitions to your photos in Adobe Lightroom CC.